Okay, let's make a start. Welcome everybody. My name is David Nicholson. I'm the chair of the Worcester Acute Hospitals NHS Trust, and this is a trust board meeting in public of that trust. I've got apologies for absence from Richard Oostrom, Christine Blanchard and Wakar, and we've got standing in for Christine, we've got Jules Walton, the newly appointed Deputy Chief Medical Officer. Welcome, Jules, to your first meeting of the board. I hope you find it interesting and informative, and you feel that you can make a contribution to it.
Thank you, Chair.
Just as briefly, last week, of course, we saw the International Day of the Midwife, and there were lots of activities around the hospital just to recognise that. And just on behalf of the board, can I express my thanks and support to our fantastic midwifery workforce, incredibly valued by us and doing a tremendous job for our population. And secondly, to mark International Nursing Day, which is today. Again, we have an absolutely remarkable nursing workforce in our organisation, particularly over the last 2 years. Whatever's been thrown at them, they've managed to deal with and give them fantastic services to our patients. So thank you to all our nurses for that. With that in mind, we've chosen a particular story to start the meeting off today. One of the things about having a patient or staff story at the beginning of the meeting is it grounds us in the reality of the services and the things that we do and provide. And it's always important to start the meeting off in this way. It enables us to look at all other things in perspective of both the patients and our staff experience of working with us in this particular trust. So I'm going to hand over to what appear a very proud Paula Gardner, and so she should be, as our chief nurse, to start the conversation. Paula.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I am very proud. So as Sir David has already stated, it is May the 12th, which is International Nurses Day, which is a global celebration of all nurses. And obviously it is also Florence Nightingale's birthday. And as we've said, as Sir David has stated, we're going to mark this day with a story on the focus of the International Nurses Programme at Worcester Acute. So the running order will be that Kate Knight will just say a few words, who's our lead nurse for professional development and international nurse recruitment. Kate's on the gallery. And then we'll play a film which tells the story of 3 of our international nurses. And then Kate will then share lessons, some key lessons about what's been achieved and how this programme is supporting us with our challenges, but also sharing good practice, increased career opportunities, and where we need to carry on recruiting through our international nurse programme. And then there'll be an opportunity for discussion and questions from the board. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kate, Kate and Louise. Louise is also part of the international nurse recruitment, and they've done all of the hard work on this. So thank you, Kate. Over to you.
Good morning. I'm Kate, and I am joined with Louise Pearson, who's our lead for education and workforce. Thank you for inviting us. We feel very privileged to be attending on the International Day of the Nurse. So I'm just going to share a slide with you, if that's okay, and talk about our programme. Okay, so we have been recruiting international nurses since 2019. It's part of the NHS's long-term plan, and the government have set targets to recruit 50,000 nurses across the UK by 2025. In 2018, the trust vacancy rate was extremely high, which meant there was an increase in bank and agency spend. sick supply had also decreased due to the abolition of the bursary for student nurses. So Worcestershire Acute welcomed our first group of international nurses in August 2019. And that group, all of them still remain in the trust with us today. Our journey started in partnership with the Global Learners Programme, and by December 2019 we started working with NHSP International. At the peak of our recruitment, we received cohorts of sizes 26 and have moved to a more gradual intake of between 6 and 12 nurses per month. The recruitment process is very complex and quite lengthy. We interview our nurses first and foremost, then offer them a job. We do the pre-employment checks and apply for their certificate of sponsorships and visas. The nurses then travel to the UK, undertake our OSCE training programme, then take their exam and ultimately get their NMC PIN number, enabling them to work as a registered nurse within our trust. Try to apply our forward values to what we do, and we try and make it a little easier for everybody to kind of understand what goes into international nurse recruitment. So we provide educational support to achieve their registration. We also provide our nurses with pastoral support. These nurses are leaving everything behind, their families, husbands, wives, children, in order to set up their lives here. So it is really important to us to make sure that we get everything right and help them in any way we can. So we manage at the moment 9 properties. We have, when we was recruiting up to 26, we have managed up to 16 properties at any one time, providing our international nurses with accommodation for 3 months when they start within their trust. We provide them with trust information, a guide to the UK and Worcestershire, a 24/7 on-call service for them for emergencies and additional support. We meet and greet them on arrival. We do their food shopping, ready for when they land, and organise bus and train passes and their BRP, so the residency permit as well. We provide them professional development support. We have a closed Facebook group for them and WhatsApp groups. We do resource workbooks, support with housing references, salary queries, introduce them to the BAME network and their community network as well. No delays every day. We ensure that the recruitment is timely. It is very important that we get this right for our nurses as they have to make arrangements to leave their country and move to a new country. So we offer them a place in the trust within 24 hours of interview. We aim to get their onboarding checks completed within 2 months from interview, and their certificate of sponsorship is issued a minimum of 6 weeks prior to arrival. Arrival in the UK is usually within 1 week of receiving their visa, so it's quite quick work that we have to do within that time. And we, depending on the OSCE test centre, we usually book their test after 5 weeks of arrival, and the 5 weeks we do give them teaching every day for their tests. We listen and we learn, we lead, we provide them pastoral support based on their feedback and their experiences. As we go along, we review this on a monthly basis with every group, and we take on board new suggestions from previous groups. We work in collaboration with Worcestershire's Health and Care Trust. We share our knowledge and our experience so other trusts can get it right too, and we also provide OSCE training for Worcester Health and Care Trust as well. After all the hard work that our nurses put into this, we think it's time for a celebration. So before their exams, we like them to relax, and we have a a celebration to recognise the effort that they put into coming this far and taking their test. We also support other departments, so we've helped to support overseas medical and AHP recruitment too. It's just a little glimpse of everything we do in picture forms. All the information we provide them is at the bottom of the screen, and we meet them, all our groups, from the airport, each individual properties. We make sure they're settled in, and then there's pictures of our training areas which they do. I'm going to hand over to Anna now and then come back to the slides to go through all the lessons we've learned and achievements. Thank you. Over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Hello everybody, myself Rajesh Pawan. I'm one of the international nurses who works in Worcestershire Hospital. I joined in the trust in 2020 August. From the first day onwards, the support which I received from the trust and all the things, for example my OSCE training and theatre training, which is really outstanding. Certain procedures is different from my complex, so they gave time to learn and give the support and gave the confidence to work independently. Now I feel that there's no difference back in India and here. I really recommend the trust, Worcestershire NHS Trust, because when I joined I was a junior band 5 nurse, and I had nearly 10 years of experience in different countries, different hospitals. So I talked to my matron, Mr. Matthew Trotman, and he has accepted my experience, not only my experience, my colleague's experience, as well as and upgraded to a band 5 top. If you work sincerely and work really hard working and sincerely, the trust is really supportive.
Hello, my name is Sangeeta Jayaraman. I'm one of the nurses working in the theatres in Alexandra Hospital, Redditch. Actually, I got introduced by one of the friends who work in Worcester Royal Hospital regarding the recruitment program. And within 5 days, my life has just changed, because on of the Thursday, I got a call and email, and on Tuesday, I received my offer letter after the interview. If I ask some questions, I used to get the answer instantaneously, no matter it's a night or day, Indian time or UK time. Usually, the people who have left the family in their mother country and coming to the new place, they will be thinking about the safety, how we are going to get settled with the things, especially for the food. But you won't believe, my fridge and everything was completely filled. They kept us so comfortable, and I felt so safe and secure. It's such a wonderful experience, because everyone is life path is different. Everyone is leaving something behind, and they are taking a courage to pass the country across. And this team from the professional development and learning team, they become our family. They treated us like a family.
Hello, my name is Deepthi Abraham. I work as a nurse in theatre, Kidderminster here. I joined here in this trust in December 2021. Here in Kidderminster, we have a very good and well-planned training center for the OSCE. My trainers were excellent. They were knowledgeable and helpful. The training which I got, I personally feel that is high class in standard, and it was very helpful. And I was fortunate enough to pass my OSCE at my first attempt itself, and was successful to get a substantial post as a nurse in theatre. My training here was excellent. I think this is a wonderful trust, and they provide a very good training and well-planned training to the nurses. Thank you, WS Trust, helping me to achieve my long-cherished dream to work as a registered nurse in UK.
Okay. So we've learnt many things and so many things that we can't put everything on these slides. But one of the main lessons we learnt very quickly is that we ensure that we don't lose sight of the person behind the process. Everybody is individual and has their individual needs. We can see quite clearly that the overseas nurses have made a significant contribution to care as part of the patient's journey. We've recruited over 254 overseas nurses since 2019, and our retention rate is at 97.6%, which is above the national average. International nurse recruitment is just part of our workforce plan, and we also invest in domestic pipeline and apprenticeships as well. Our next steps with our international nurses, though, is to continue to support Worcester Health and Care Trust with their rescue training, continue what we're doing, and also building continued professional and career development for them to progress. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Kate. Fantastic. I mean, I'll come on to some comments later on, but I know there'll be some questions that people want to ask or issues they want to raise. So we've got Anita, who I know has played a particular important role in all of this. Anita.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Kate. First of all, I just want to absolutely commend this programme. To me, this is a real success story. I have some experience of similar kinds of programmes in other trusts, and to me, this one is head and shoulders above anything that I've seen elsewhere. And I think the two things that really stand out for me is I think we are learning and we are implementing that learning as we go. If I think back, I've been involved from the beginning, and the way we've developed how we, the aspects of the programme and of our support in response to as we've learned things, we've adapted, and I think that adaptability has been fantastic. And I must absolutely support and commend the team, particularly Kate and Kim and Louise, because the second aspect that I think really puts us apart is the real care that we show. These nurses are doing something that most of us could not contemplate doing, leaving our families, travelling 5,000 miles across the world, and maybe not seeing them for months or years. And I think that the care and the support and the compassion that they show is fantastic. So first of all, my real congratulations. That's very sincere. I do, however, have a question for Kate and the team. I think experience has shown us that this is a group of individuals who, for very obvious reasons, they've travelled across the world, they're here on their own. They can sometimes be a little backward at coming forward if there are things that aren't necessarily that they have issues or concerns. Do we feel we've got enough support in place to make them feel that they are able to speak up if there's something that they are unsure or uncomfortable about, either in terms of things they observe in their day-to-day jobs, or indeed how they are treated by colleagues or by patients or whatever? Do we feel that we are doing enough and that we actually do understand their lived experience? Thanks.
Kate.
Anita. Currently, no, we haven't been doing that as well as we probably could have been doing it. However, we have just employed 2 Band 6 nurses, international nurses, to support our team, because we were very aware that there were some aspects that needed developing. So they are underway. We are looking for additional courses, transitional phases from our classroom, where they do get an immense amount of support going out to the ward. So we are going to have our team going round and supporting them clinically, providing them with communication and assertiveness kind of training, just to say that it is okay to speak up, and looking at those cultural differences. And I think those two people we've employed are key to doing that because they've experienced it.
Thanks, Kate. Sue.
Well, thank you, Kate. I need to slightly nip my question because I've had experience with international medical training fellows, and it's a big hurdle and not to be underestimated. The way that people interact with each other, particularly hierarchies, are quite a challenge to overcome. But I mean, we had several of us had the great privilege of meeting Kate and her team, and I have to say it's one of the most impressive things, and this is not hyperbole, I've seen in an awfully long time. And what really impressed me was how happy this cadre, the latest cadre of nurses were. They didn't look cowed or worried, they were nervous, but they were clearly very happy. And I just think what you're doing, Kate, and your team is extraordinary, and your retention rate is extraordinary so far from home. So I think I'm just echoing what everybody else thinks. This is just marvellous.
Thanks, Sue. Any other questions or comments people want to make before I try and sum up? Then I think they'll. Paula.
So I just want to echo what Sue and Anita said, but they need to hear it from their chief nurse today. Kate and Louise and the team have done an amazing job. The nurses are truly, truly wonderful, and the fact that we have not had anybody drop out of this programme, and I've had international experience of international nurse recruitment in other trusts, and it isn't as good as this, nowhere near. So well done to Kate, Louise and the team. I'm really proud of you.
Very good, very good. So just as I mean, I after a career in the NHS, have spent quite a long time working in other countries over the last few years, and one thing I'd say is the thing it reinforces, and I guess it's obvious at one level, is that healthcare delivery is global, and particularly nursing is global. I like many of you probably saw some of the photographs from the Westminster Abbey. In fact, some of you might have been there. The Westminster Abbey, that thing with the lighting of the lamp and all of that. I've been to things similar to that in Karachi and Hyderabad and Beijing, and so it reinforces that that nursing is international, and there's a great spirit of internationalism within it. It is extraordinary to go, to somewhere like Karachi and see the birthday of Florence Nightingale being celebrated. It is an extraordinary experience, and I think this whole issue brings it all together, really, the international nurses thing. And just to reiterate, what an extraordinary thing to come thousands of miles away from your home and your family to set up and make a fantastic contribution. And let's face it, we really do need their contribution in terms of delivering improving services for our patients. We really do need it, and it's a fantastic thing that international nurses have done. I thank them all for the contribution that they're making to the healthcare in this country, and in particular the way in which Kate and the team have gone about it at Worcester. It is exemplary. I think it's extraordinary, and I thought it was really interesting that you couched your the contribution that you made just then in terms of the four principles underpinning the forward programme. You do live and breathe those principles, and the way you've executed it, the way you've done it has been fantastic, and I genuinely thank you and your team for that, for the way that you've done that. It is remarkable. I think the challenge for us, of course, is 97 point something retention is itself. Well, let's see if we can learn those lessons for the rest of our workforce. There are some lessons in all of this for the way we deal with all of the workforce that we should take. But genuinely, thanks, Kate, Louise, and the team, and the international nurses, all the families that are watching this programme. We genuinely do appreciate the contribution that you're making to the healthcare of the people of Worcestershire. So thank you very much.
Thanks, team.
that's a great way to start the meeting, I think. So thank you. Okay, let's move on then. Are there any items of any other business that people want to identify later on? No. Good. Okay, declarations of interest. They're obviously on the website. Are there any particular declarations of interest in relation to what's going on here? No. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting. Are they a reasonable reflection of the conversations and the decisions that we made? People are nodding. Yes. Okay, thank you very much for that. Action log, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. The actions have been updated as per the log. There are a number that are not due yet that we've got scheduled in, and we've got 3 which are due to close. And can take the log as read. Thank you.
Okay. Any issues in relation to the action log? Thank you very much. Obviously, in terms of my report, I just want to say a couple of things. One of them is just to reinforce the International Nurses Day, a fantastic thing that we should all support and welcome. Yesterday was Staff Networks Day, and we have a large number of very vibrant staff networks across the trust, and we do support them. Having staff networks is part of a vibrant and forward-looking and progressive organisation. We want to encourage and support people through all of that. And just to mention I know Matthew's going to talk about it in a bit more detail, but to note the joint board meeting we had with the Healthcare Trust last week, which is a very positive step forward for developing joint working integration across services for people of Worcestershire. Okay, let's move on then to the Chief Executive's report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody, and echo the words around celebrating International Nurses Day. As a former nurse myself, I was rooting around for my badge that I got when I qualified, but I think it's in the depths of the drawer somewhere. But big thanks, as has already been said, to all of our nurses, not only working in this organisation, but also working across the county as well, to keep people and keep our patients safe. A couple of things just to draw out from my report. This month, the Integrated Care System component of the Health and Care Act is important to us. It received royal assent last week, I believe, so that moves us towards the Integrated Care Board for Hereford and Worcestershire being established from the 1st of July. Clearly there's been previous appointments to designate positions of Chair and Chief Executive, Chief Finance Officer and Chief Nurse. The Chief Medical Officer position is still out to recruitment. As the paper refers to, there is within the Integrated Care Board membership, there are 3 positions for representatives from NHS trusts to be drawn from the 4 providers. Of course, including West Midlands Ambulance Service. Our understanding is that given the number of integrated care systems that the ambulance service supports, that they're not going to be understandably in a position to represent and nominate somebody to represent every single integrated care system. So the intention is to identify a representative drawn from the 3 organisations. Of course, though, the role is very much to be a representative to the ICB in their own right, as opposed to purely only representing the views and the priorities of the organisation that they represent. One of the positions needs to be somebody with bringing knowledge of mental health, so that can be straightforward for us with our integrated provider of the Health and Care Trust providing mental health services. So I think the anticipation is by the end of this week, or beginning of next week, we're in a position to nominate an individual from the trust to represent the Worcestershire Acute Hospitals. In terms of the conversation, the note that Sir David mentioned around the board-to-board session that we had, I think that was really useful exercise. Very much a getting to know you session between board members of both organisations. We're in the process of writing up some, if you like, next steps. Won't be a long list of actions, but I think one of the things that we want to move towards is really agreeing a small number of areas that we work harder together on to improve the approach to integrated care, particularly at place level in the county, which is still needing some work to really define what the role of a leadership committee at place level really is in terms of the priorities of the people that we serve in the county. But I think the session with the Healthcare Trust Board at least enabled us to get to know each other, a little bit of better understanding about the respective roles and challenges. I think there's certainly more to do in relation to that, and I think there's also more to do to really expose the big challenges, the big risks, the big opportunities, but also how we might approach them more effectively together. So more on that at a future board, Chair and colleagues. And then just to note two other points, fantastic work that's been done by the palliative care team, opening during Diabetes Week, the Peony Room. Board colleagues will remember that the palliative care team joined us for a presentation at the beginning of the board meeting a few months ago, trailing their support programme, and obviously the opening of facilities for relatives to be able to come together around somebody that is dying within our hospitals was one of the key components that part of that programme. It's great that was opened with our chief nurse support last week. And then finally, just to mention all of the provider leaders and ICB chief execs across England all got together in the same place for the first time for I think probably 2.5 years, which in itself was a feat. And we heard directly from the NHS Chief Executive, Amanda Pritchard, and her team around the priorities for this year and next, and helpfully, and of course, not unsurprisingly, they completely mirror the priorities that are articulated in our annual plan paper that's coming up next on the agenda. Quality, access, money, health inequalities, workforce are the top five, and those that I think are reflected quite clearly in our report. So I'll pause there, Chair. Happy to take any questions or observations.
Thank you. I should say that it's not passed my notice looking at your report that it says that the closing date for nominations is the 13th of May. Now, I'm no genius, but I've worked out that if we're going to nominate someone, we need to do it today. So indeed. I'm going to do that before the end of this thing. Anita.
Thank you, Chair. Matthew, thank you for that. It's really just a sort of a reflection and a suggestion going forward. Given where we are in the terms of the ICB, I wonder whether going forward there could be a section of your report which actually focus specifically on particular examples of where we are supporting system partners. I believe, for example, at the moment we're doing some work or supporting Wye Valley on pathology, where there's a particular challenge there, and I'm sure there are many examples, but I do think that we going forward need to reflect in our report to the public not only what we're doing internally but also what we're doing with the system. So a suggestion that maybe a section going forward talking just the highlights of some stuff that we're doing to support our system partners and to support the ICS. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Anita. I think that's right, because I do think there is quite a lot going on, and clearly as we move forward, from our patients' perspective and the public's perspective, they expect us to be working in partnership with all of our health and social care partners, and we need to make sure that people understand the wide array of things that we are doing. I do think, and I've talked this through with Joe Newton, we do need to up our focus on that external environment. Now we're coming out of the demands associated with COVID and its operational challenges internally in relation to beds and so on, that we need to free up some headspace to really be outward focused, both in terms of the provider collaborative environment, but also, as you say, the good work that's already underway, and making sure that we're showcasing that to the board for discussion. So completely agree with that approach, Anita. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Can I just take the issue of the nominations? We've got the opportunity to nominate 2 people. My proposal would be that we would nominate the 2 chief executives. We'd nominate Matthew Hopkins from this organisation, and the person to represent mental health would be Sarah. I can't remember her second name now. God, what's this?
Dugan. Sarah
Dugan. Sorry. So we, in a spirit of partnership, nominate those 2 people. Is that okay? Yes, good, thank you. And then, in a sense, Matthew, when you're doing your bit of the report, you can also report on your activities in that.
Indeed. Yeah. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you very much on all of that. So let's move on then to the 22-23 annual plan, and I think Joe is going to lead us through the conversation on that.
Thank you, Chair. So the paper before you outlines the plan for 22-23, and it's for noting because the full plan was approved at private board and has been submitted to NHSEI as part of the ICS plan on 28th, so I can confirm that. And it follows a considerable triangulation we've actually had internally, but also through F&P and board discussion previously. Just to highlight, in terms of delivering against the requirements, the activity, we are stating that we're going to achieve national activity performance targets are met. This is subject to the new outpatient follow-up conversion rule being removed, as we have previously discussed, and also the achievement of the 104-week quotas, excluding the 88 patients for orthodontics. From a workforce perspective, we are investing in our workforce, but also looking at how we can move from bank and agency through to substantive roles, as outlined. And from a finance perspective, the submitted financial position for 22-23 is reporting a 42 million deficit. We recognise that includes some risks, particularly around achievement of the PEP target. There is we've been working actively through those internally with the PRMs and through the divisions and teams, and that will continue. And there is a gap, as has been previously reported, that also we're looking to mitigations for how we close that. The risks are identified further in the plan to access the ERF funding, and there are ongoing discussions both at regional and national level in terms of some elements of that. But just wanted to highlight to you that in terms of priorities for the year, as Matthew has identified, we have grouped those in terms of thinking about our delivering on quality, and that's not only on quality of our services, but also in investment around infrastructure. We anticipate some big capital projects will come to fruition this year in terms of the UEC, robotics on the Alex site, and also our digital infrastructure through the electronic patient record and cyber security. So there's a lot of investment opportunities as well. And then clearly the access is really important in terms of helping support the long waits for patients, that as well understood from the post-COVID wave. And likewise, actually, from a healthier lives perspective, investing in our staff, but also recognising the impact that health inequalities has had on our communities and how we bring that into the delivery of our services is going to be key as we go into next year. So I'll pause there, Chair, just in case any colleagues want to add any further elements and take any questions. But it is to note, because this reflects the paper that was approved in private board last month. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. You say there are further discussions going on around all of this plan. Do you want to say anything about that, Joe or Matthew? Or
yeah, so we've been having active discussions through the PRMs this last month, both to look at how we can close the gap and look at delivering on the performance elements, and also looking at the PEP perspective in terms of testing. If you recall, we were testing the maturity of those, and there's been a little bit of movement on those where those might consider high risk, but also identifying where we can actually look to close the remaining gap. I think we're clear about the need to have
tighter grip in terms of actually going forward about how they're reporting. But I think the governance of this will go via TME and then to F&P to be able to monitor the performance ongoingly.
Okay, thanks.
Matthew's got his hand up to add.
Matthew.
Yeah, just a couple of points to add to Joe's point, referring back to the conversations, particularly with colleagues at the CCG prior to taking on their ICB roles. The system plan as submitted has a financial gap that the colleagues Simon Trickett, Mark Duffin are working with the regional team to find ways to close. Clearly, the cost of inflation is one of the big drivers for the gap. So there's an ongoing discussion with regard to that. There is an active discussion about whether partners across the system, ourselves, Health Care Trust, Wye Valley, and CCG themselves could go further in relation to their stretch targets on cost reduction and cost savings in order to reduce the planning gap at the moment. The ask of us was to look further for a further 3 million in relation to our existing cost reduction plan. I think that remains quite an ambitious stretch, but we are still working with the team, both corporate and clinical services, to see whether there's further opportunities. We haven't actually closed down that yet, because I think part of the discussion with the system colleagues is whether there might be any non-recurrent support to enable us to deliver on that. So I think that's the first thing to note, Chair. I think the second thing to note is that there remains a lack of clarity about the application of the elective recovery fund, whether it is applied and built into the plan from the start of the year, and I think that's our preference, but because of course one of the risks to achievement of that is that it's supposed to be handled at system level, and partly depends on our colleagues at Wye Valley being able to achieve their plan. And whilst we fully support them and look forward to mutual support where we can, we know that they've had themselves significant operational pressures that have meant that elective delivery has been a challenge for them as well. So there's another element, Chair, that we're still working through with our CCG colleagues about how the ERF elements will be applied to the plan. And as I said, we'll work through that over the next few weeks, discuss that at Finance and Performance to see if we can work on the assumption that it's applied, certainly for the first quarter, in order that we it's incentivising delivery of our activity plan as opposed to waiting to the year end and therefore remaining a risk to us rather the way through the year. I think those are the two key points. I think the final point, Chair, just to note, is that since the discussion private board, we've had a number of meetings with the key players in relation to the delivery of the plans, so Joe, Paul, Tina and Robert, to really make sure that people are working in a very aligned way in order to make sure that we're working together to deliver on the plan, and that will continue on a daily basis as we go forward over the next few months.
Thanks, Matthew. Colin.
Thanks, Chair. If it hadn't been for COVID and all the other immense pressures on our team, in the ideal world, I think we should have been looking at this 1 year situation in the context of a 3-year plan and a longer term financial strategy. We are where we are, but I guess there are two components to my comment. Firstly, could we have some indication of how soon we feel we'll be able to get the 3-year plan and assess what we've agreed today in that context? But also, have we had any indications from the system about their views on the sort of overall strategy for the foreseeable future? Because we've moved back into the deficit situation. Prior to COVID and so on, we did talk about identifying whether some component of our deficit was structural, whether that should be recognised. I'd be very interested to know whether all of that debate's dead now because the funding system has changed, or whether that's something else we should have a weather eye to.
Thanks. I'll get you to reply to this at the end, Matthew, if that's right. There'll be a few things, I guess. Simon.
Thanks, David. A couple of observations and a couple of questions from me. The observations are to draw everybody's attention to the Finance and Performance Committee report that's taken later on in the agenda for information, where at FMPC we were talking about over-programming on PEPs, so that we actually plan to deliver more PEPs than we actually need to, on the basis that there will be slippage. And I think that's an important thing to bear in mind going forward. And then also we had quite a long debate, which we have as a board as well in other places, around how much investment we're going to need to actually deliver the changes that we need to deliver the activity rates that will then generate the ERF for us. And I don't think we should lose sight of that. And again, there are some figures there in the Finance and Performance Committee minutes that, or report, that I think we shouldn't lose sight of. This is going to be a real challenge. The couple of questions are, one around governance, and how are we going to be assured that this is all happening on time? The last thing I think any of us need is surprises along the way, where we suddenly find that we're, heaven forfend, millions adrift of where we should be. And I think, for me, what are the canaries in the mine shaft? When will we know that we're on track, and particularly if we're not on track? And then finally, to end on a positive note, because Murphy always was an optimist, do we believe at any stage that the centre might not exactly soften, but that there might be additional funding come that might help everybody, not just ourselves, but given the nature of the challenge that everybody's been set, are there any sort of rumblings or starts of indications that maybe there may be more money that would come to trusts generally that would help us on this journey that we're on?
Thanks, Simon. Anita.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions to add to Matthew's and Joe's list. So my first one is, it seemed, it's, the plan says, this is achievable. There seem to be two major caveats to that, apart from the obvious ones. One is the one about the outpatient follow-up conversion, where, if I'm understanding it correctly, if that conversion is not agreed to, then we would not be able to make our ERF. So I wondered if you could comment on do you have an update on where we are? Do we think that's likely to happen? The second one, of course, is the 104-week waits where we've got orthodontics. I know there was some talk about system trying to do something to help in that area, but again, if we can't. We can say we can achieve it excluding orthodontics, but I suspect the centre won't want us to exclude orthodontics, and therefore that's also a risk for us. And my final question is this: I think Joe alluded to the fact that actually kind of the monitoring and tracking of progress is going to be key, and I noticed a very central role here for the PRMs. I think in the past, at board level, we haven't necessarily had visibility or assurance of the strength of the PRM model, and whether that is a mechanism that really will be able to check on progress, hold people to account, and I mean really hold people to account, and take remedial action or lead to remedial action. And I wondered if you could comment about whether you had plans to beef up that process, perhaps, to give us all a bit more assurance on that. Thank you.
Thanks. Joe, are you going to answer some of those, and Matthew going to answer some of the others, or how do you want to do it, Joe?
Yes, I'll answer some, and I don't know whether Paul wants to particularly talk to the outpatients and orthodontics piece, but just in terms of, I was going to pick up on Simon's point about the PRMs using, and how will we know if we're achieving the activity, particularly around the PEPs. So we're this month just putting into the divisional budgets both the divisional PEPs that they're raising, also the corporate ones that apply to them. So those will directly go into the budget, so they will be measurable through the PRMs as suggested. And obviously then that will feed through. We've been reviewing the IPR dashboard that Vicky might talk to later, so that we can reflect all the elements that are feeding through the plan, so we get that alignment as well. So hopefully that will address what you're outlining there. I don't know whether, Paul, did you want to comment particularly around the strengthening around the PRM accountability bit, if you're there? Otherwise I can speak to it.
So in terms of the kind of questions you've asked, Anita, at the moment there isn't an agreement with the region on the new follow-up removal. The discussions are still going on. They understand the issue, but that has not yet been bottomed out. in terms of the orthodontics, the position is moving. There is a recognition that that we inherited an orthodontic issue linked to commissioning decisions in the past. This is not just a COVID issue. COVID just made it worse. There is really good working now between SpecCom, the CCG colleagues and ourselves, particularly the CCG and our surgical team. And I think that the work that we've done over the last week reduces the risk from 88, which is in the paper, down to 64. And I think where the regional team and national team are moving towards is that if we ensure that there are no 104-week breaches at the end of June other than orthodontics, and that we have a clear plan that would remove those orthodontic patients in Q2 with no further breaches. I'm not saying, I wouldn't use the word acceptable, but I would use the word recognised. And so I think much more progress has been made on the orthodontic issue. And we also have a proposal that Matthew, Rob and myself will be discussing tomorrow morning that could actually reduce that 66 by a further 20 patients. So I think the region and the national team recognise that given we were talking about 384 and that number is now at 66 and could reduce further. And I must emphasise that has really been collaborative working with SpecCom, CCG and ourselves. It has been a really positive piece of work that shows if all entities work together with a kind of common aim as opposed to pointing fingers, you can make a significant difference. In terms of the PRMs, I think we're clear on their role. Divisional teams now are clear that about membership of the PRMs and also involving the clinical directors, so that it's not just a divisional team and there's clarity at clinical directorate level. And I think the other thing I would add is that we now have, which F&P will see, and is going through the PRMs and TME, is that we have very clear trajectories now on activity levels month by month and performance on the key long weights and cancer standards about what must be achieved month by month, and it is not it's not a hockey stick, it's not tail-ended to the back end of the year, it's a very clear delivery month by month, and that will allow, I think that also picks up Simon's point, we'll know within a few days of the end of each month clearly what the position is and whether there are any risks. And I've agreed with Vicky and Matthew that in terms of the IPR going forward, it will have that trajectory in, it will have the actual position, and it will have a clear but concise statement about the actions that are being taken if there is any movement away from the plan. I think it's also just worth noting that at national and regional level, they're really interested in what happens after Q1. There's a recognition that the need to ramp up activity is not going to happen in the first 6 to 8 weeks of the year. Though having said that, our trajectory, it will actually show, as I've said, a month by month performance that is actually expecting delivery within Q1, not tailgated.
Thanks, Paul. Robert.
Thank you, David. One of the other aspects just of, I think Paul's answered all the points I was actually going to cover. There was one other item just to be clear about on the report. We have said that we hadn't included costs for the pathway decision unit, previously known as the clinical assessment unit and white space. I'm sure we'll talk about that in the private board. That was we did include in the final submission the costs with a equal and opposite income from the system. So that's it's what the assumptions, we've been very clear with that with the system as well. So that's just for clarity really on the paper.
Thanks, Robert. Okay, Matthew, do you want to cover?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just cover a couple of the other points I think that Colin and particularly Simon made. I think the 3-year plan, Colin. I think we've got the workforce element and the people kind of chapter, if you like. We've pretty much nailed the quality and patient safety chapter. So we're building the plan, I think, and that's been running along in parallel, as you said. Ideally we'd have had it ready, and this would be, noting year one of it. I would expect, certainly before the end of June, we'll have something to be sharing that includes the narrative, includes the alignment with the ICS. Includes more detail around the financial outlook, such as we know it, and also, clearly there's the capital components that Joe's already articulated. The gap at the moment, I think, which colleagues will recognise, is the alignment of a development control plan for each site, the estates plan, and the clinical services strategy, and making sure that all is aligned. I think that's the element that we've got to resolve. And of course the question that was posed there of the underlying structural deficit is something that we'll need to articulate within the plan and a route to deal with it. So some of the key chapters are already there, ready, pretty much ready to go. We need to just make sure that we're able to put it together, and Joe needs to identify somebody to if you like, write the document that ties it all together and brings the golden thread to it. This question, Colin, of the conversations that we had pre-COVID around the long-term funding gaps within the county and how that would be dealt with. I think they're certainly still there as a conversation topic. I think it goes back to my earlier comment around the Health and Care Trust and how we can work together to deal with some of the ways in which money is being spent that ought to be done differently. Think about the frailty pathway for patients. There's quite a lot of costs that we could probably reduce if we did things differently, but those have a longer gestation period. So I do think we'll be reopening the discussion with the regional and national teams once this planning round is settled. The caveats to that, I think, and it picks up Anita's question of whether there's going to be, or I think it was Simon's question of whether there's going to be likelihood of any extra money. We do understand there is a sizable gap at national level for this year's plan. And the only hint that we've had is with regard to support for inflationary pressures. I think beyond that, I think we should work on a basis highly unlikely there'll be any further immediate funding into this year. Years 2 and 3 of our plan, I think, is open for debate, and we'll need to work with our colleagues in the ICB team in the region to understand what that looks like. So I think I wouldn't want to look too gloomy on it, but I do think, given the informal signals that we've had around the national planning gap, I think we're going to need to focus on what we can deal with, what we can do in terms of productivity, efficiency and quality improvement. And then just to reiterate the key points that Paul and Joe have made, Simon, in response to your question, canaries in the coal mine question has very much been taken on board, and some of the key headline metrics around run rate, around elective delivery, around any impact of emergency demand on elective recovery. Obviously the splitting of elective onto the Alex and the Kidderminster site are key components of that, and a clear tracking. We talked this morning about how we track the productivity and efficiency improvements in theatres and outpatients, and how we do that, as well as other productivity schemes across the clinical divisions, and we're formulating a plan about how we do that complements the PRMs that Paul's described, not gets in the way of them. So a lot of focus on this, colleagues, in answer to your questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, certainly, I mean, this is the probably third or fourth conversation we've had about this plan. Probably more conversations we've had about this plan than any we've done in years gone by. And there are two or three things I want to say about it. The first one is, and I've said this before, but I will, you know, in the absence of any doubt about it, a risk, identifying something as a risk, is what it says on the tin. It doesn't mean we've accepted it's going to happen. And I know that's obvious, but sometimes you just have to say it. And you know, my understanding from this, from conversations with Richard, with Matthew and Paul and others, is that you know, this plan is possible to deliver. It's not inevitable by any stretch, and there are risks, but it is possible. And you know, that has to be the position of the whole executive team around all of it. It's possible to do it, and we need to make sure we do it. The second point that I would make is that, you know, we do need those 5 or 4 or 6 or whatever the number is, high-level measures that give us a really good idea about, you know, what's actually happening and whether we're delivering these things. I think that's a really important thing for us to do, so we can do it, because in a sense the governance arrangements and the reporting and all of that are all very interesting, but unless they you know, achieve actions and things happen, it's all, you know, measuring after the event. So making sure we've got high level indicators that mean we can move quickly to make decisions, I think is going to be important. I still think though that the balance of risk here is dangerously put on us. I don't know. I know why this happens, and I'll give you a couple of examples. One of them is the outpatient changes. If those outpatient changes don't happen, that means we will have to forego, I don't know how many millions ERF. I don't know what do we know what the number would be?
In total, sorry David, total the ERF is about 15.7 million. There's some pieces from the specialty commissioning and all the rest of it, but yeah, it's around about that.
So if we can't get someone to be persuaded, that's going to add £15 million onto the deficit that we have. And I just think that's unreasonable to expect a group of, you know, with the best will in the world, these will be middle management people at the NHS England will be making those decisions. We really do need to escalate them to make sure people understand the implications of this relatively simple thing for people to do. I cannot imagine why it's taking so long to do it. But I do think that's an example of us taking more risk than perhaps we should do in the circumstances. And the second bit of risk is, if you look at the system position, we've got a deficit of 42 million, and that's a stretch to deliver it. I know that Hereford have got a deficit of circa 25, 27 million and are at the edge of being able to deliver it. That gives a total acute sector deficit of, somebody's going to tell me now, 67 million? 67 million? 67 million? But the system are announcing a deficit for the system of just over 50 million. Now that indicates to me that what's happening here is all the financial risk is being put on the acute sector, and really we need to think more carefully about the way the money is distributed, so that balance is reasonably and equitably applied across the system as a whole. And I think there are two examples of where I think we need to really push hard on the whole issue about system risk, because traditionally, all the financial risks of certainly of Worcestershire have been put on the acute sector, all of the financial risk. And we know how debilitating that is, and unreasonable it is for an organisation like ours. So making sure that risk is properly delivered across the system is an important part of it. So as Optimist Murphy says, no surprises please in all of this. We need to follow this all the way through, get those headline measures that will assure us that things are going in the right direction or not. Over delivery is always a good thing, particularly around PEPs. You know, irrespective of what happens, we're going to need more and more in the future. The quicker we can start them, the better. But thanks to everybody for all the work that you've been doing over the last period. It's not quite ended yet, of course, because we've got all of the emergency pressures and cancer pressures that we're going to talk about later coming up to us anyway, and we've got the issue of next winter as well to think about. So no shortage of things for us to be pursuing, but thanks for the work everyone's done, and let's put everything we've got behind this plan and make it a reality, so that we can both improve the services for our patients but also steward our responsibilities in the best possible way. So thank you everybody for all of that. So I think for the first time in my career, we're going to note the approval of a plan. So can we note the approval of the plan? We can. Thank you very much. Very good. Let's move on then to the integrated performance report, and Vicky.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just going to talk about the report as it is at month 12, and then if I may briefly, just after we've done that, just come back to the design principles that we're currently adopting around looking forward, and I will reference those 4 or 5 high-level measures that we've just spent some time talking about, if I may. So this is the integrated performance report for month 12, so our year-end position, though you will know through the report that some of that activity figure is not yet a fully validated position, because that's dependent on SUS timeframes, etc. It was approved at Trust Management Executive on the 20th of April, and it's been through the Finance, Performance and Quality Governance Committee, and it has an overall assurance level of 4, which remains unchanged from previous months. In terms of key issues, we've identified there COVID as a presenting condition, which is how we allocate our bed stock to our patients as they arrive in hospital and require a bed dependent on their COVID status. So that's now where they have presenting conditions, for example cardiology, we will go into a cardiology bed, as opposed to trying to designate our bed stock in a different way. And I'm sure Paul and Paul will probably talk about how that's going through. In terms of good news stories, and we do have some good news stories, we've identified 3 areas of good news. Which is really important when you consider the year we've had, Chair, because it's not been easy, as we've just described and as we've gone through there. So we've got workforce, and we've consistently performed above the peer group and national average for our sickness absence rates, and I think we should really celebrate the fact that we've got a good occupational health service and staff wellbeing offer. So thank you for that. The recovery and restoration of services, so you'll see there from the table that's on page 27 of your pack, where we've identified that for H1 and H2 we've overachieved against our plan, with the exception of the 2 points of delivery which are identified. So that's also a really good news story for us, and our finance year end position is also much better than we thought it was going to be. We originally said have a £1.9 million deficit, and we've actually brought that in at 1.4, though you will recall that earlier on in quarter 4 we were indicating at one point we'd be at a £4.3 million deficit. So some really good work that we've achieved throughout that. Areas for improvement, so urgent and emergency care, but you will note that the demand increased 11% on the 1920 position, and we've also seen a 5% increase in terms of admissions through our ED departments, and obviously the subsequent impact there for our ambulance handover delays and non-elective demand. Just turn the page. Cancer referrals have hit an all-time high in March 2022. There's a substantial level of high demand across most of our cancer pathways, and that's demonstrated through the performance against some of those standards. And infection prevention and control, where we had a really in-depth discussion of the Quality Governance Committee around some of the challenges, particularly around C. difficile. So I'll just pause there, if I may, Chair, and ask any questions of Exec Directors as you wish.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions about that? Colin.
Thank you. The question is around planning assumptions. We see as a consistent theme through the report the impact of increased demand on our services, and you've just referenced it, particularly around cancer referrals, Vicky. Does the executive think that this is a permanent step change in the level of demand, or are we talking about a sort of backlog induced by the impact of COVID, and are we in that case planning that there will be a reduction in demand at some point?
Thanks, Colin.
Can I come in, Chair?
You can.
So our expectation, Colin, at the moment is that the increase in referrals we will see throughout the year, particularly in skin, breast, and colorectal. As an example, for colorectal, we were seeing referrals of around 400 a month, and they're now standing at 600 a month. What I would say is that I've had a discussion with Matthew's support with Simon Trickett about us getting a better engagement with primary care colleagues. And I'm also, I wouldn't normally say this in a board meeting, but I'm also pleased to say that yesterday we appointed our new clinical director for cancer services, and we've actually appointed outside our organisation to a senior management position. We've appointed Carl Elson, who is a Worcestershire GP by background. Carl has a lot of experience in cancer, and I think appointing someone of that calibre to that post to help better engage with primary care teams. I think one of the issues that we have on cancer referrals is that the performers that exist on the 2-week wait pathways have kind of become a bit tick box. If this symptom, refer. And I think we need to work far closer with our GP colleagues to ensure that there's perhaps more, and I know the pressure on primary care, so I don't underestimate this, but there is perhaps more a clinical face-to-face evaluation prior to referral, and that will be extremely challenging. But without that, or a different approach to the referral mechanism, I think this level of referral is recurrent, and even with the interventions that we're now talking about, they won't have any immediate impacts because of the challenge in making those changes because of the primary care workload. But I don't foresee any change in referral patterns during 22-23. What we need to do is also put in more effective triage mechanisms, and there are also things that we need to discuss again with primary care and system colleagues. So, for example, on colorectal, if you have a double fit negative, whether that referral should take place, the chance of cancer with a double fit negative is probably about 0.4%. So there is a risk, but the level, the counter to the risk is such high numbers of referrals means that patients with a potential cancer are delayed in being seen. So it is in part about balancing those risks, and they're very sensitive, difficult discussions, but those are the sort of debates that we are going to need to get into to ensure that, one, that we can achieve the faster diagnosis standard, that within 28 days, and many people would say 28 days is too long, but that is the national standard, that within those 28 days of referral, a patient either has a confirmed cancer diagnosis or it's confirmed that there is no cancer present. So I think we're going to internally have to improve our assessment and triage mechanisms, but also we're going to have some difficult clinical debates around referral.
Okay, but just to reinforce, so I understand that properly, Paul, you're saying that you are assuming the same kinds of growth in referrals that we've had previous in the last 6 months in the 6 months going forward?
Yes, but what I would say is, whilst we're seeing that growth in referrals, we need to recognise that we're not seeing the equivalent growth in confirmed cancers.
No, I understand. I'll come back to that in a minute. But Anita.
Yes, thanks. And I think, Paul, you have partly addressed one of my questions. So first of all, I mean, thank you, and thank you, Vicky, for having some good news stories. It's nice to see that. So thank you. But I did have a question on the cancer and one also on the infection prevention and control. So I think in terms of cancer, Paul, you've answered part of it. So we've got a large number, but from what you say about actual confirmed diagnosis, so does that mean that the acuity of the people that are being referred, it's not like the acuity has got a lot higher or anything like that? So I guess that's good news. But clearly, following on from your comment, if the numbers are going to continue to grow or maintain at this sort of level, I mean, 400 to 600 a month is a significant increase. It becomes that sort of revisiting the pathways becomes absolutely imperative, because there is a real danger that patients are going to come to harm if they carry on as we are. So I think we will recognise that what you described about triaging and working with partners is really important. I mean, have we started that work? Have we got a timeline for when? Is this recognised by the system, and can we make some changes to those pathways sooner rather than later, I guess, because we're going to have to try and mitigate this in some way. My second question is about IPC, and I apologise in advance to Paula because it probably displays my ignorance. It's great that we're meeting 4 out of 5, but I guess what I don't really understand is that I would have thought that the IPC controls that we put in would have been effective against all 5. And I know that community incidence of C. diff is high, and I get that, but I guess I don't understand how can it be that our IPC measures are good enough to address the other 4, but aren't good enough to deal with the C. diff. And as I say, I apologise in advance if I'm just displaying ignorance there. Thanks.
Shall I put the first question?
Yeah, you do the first one, Paul.
So yes, the work is already underway, and yes, it is recognised by system partners. I think the other thing is that we may have to change some of our internal arrangements as well, and bolster. And please don't come back to me saying, "Oh, so you're saying this is going to hit our financial position." We are talking with the System and the Cancer Alliance, for example, within colorectal, whether we need to whether the Cancer Alliance funding, which they do hold a lot of funds, can support an increase in clinical nurse specialists within colorectal to enable an enhanced triage process. So I think we've got to enhance the medical model with other clinical professionals to deal with this level of demand. But absolutely, it is very clearly recognised within the system, and there's a lot of support to enable us to review the pathways. And as I say, the one example I gave was around the double fit negative on colorectal. There are risks, although the risks, as I said, 0.4% may have cancer having had a double fit negative, but if the first time we're seeing people on that pathway is 24 days rather than 14, then there is a balance of risk here, as well as looking at how we internally triage and the referral pathways.
Chair, can I come in with regards to the infection control? Oh, I'll come in anyway. Okay, Anita, so absolutely get your point about 4 out of 5, and obviously this is a target related issue as such. With regards to particularly C. diff, where we have breached the target, there are a number of factors that can inhibit that, in the sense of prescribing of antibiotics and the use of proton pump inhibitors, which is particularly used on the gastro ward, which is where we've seen our most increase. We've also had issues with the cleaning within the Aikenbury block, particularly Aikenbury 4, and we've had to instruct obviously estates to remove radiator covers, so where dust has basically collected. And we've also had an issue with a particular cleaner, of which we have now given some extra training to. So absolutely take your point, but with regards to the targets and what we prescribe, community aside, what we prescribe internally has also affected our issues. Notwithstanding, we're not letting that drop, and obviously we'll continue to make sure that we go through the cleanliness and infection control processes, especially within Aikenbury and trauma and orthopaedics, where as you can see from the report, 39% of the cases were attributed to there. And again, some of the issues within nursing is the isolation, the correct isolation and timely isolation of patients with diarrhoea. That is hampered at times with the limited side room facility we have in the hospital. I hope that answers your question.
Can I say, Paula, that as I remember it, there used to be a time when every other day someone was reporting on our ability to do IPC. What's the latest on all of that?
So, Chair, I can hardly hear you. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Can you just speak? I think there's something wrong with my speakers.
Okay, so there used to be a time at this board when IPC was on the agenda almost all the time, largely because we were constantly being inspected by somebody or other to tell us how good or bad we are. What's the latest on all of that sort of thing?
But I was going. I was going to bring up another good news story, Chair, but then given Anita's question, I did wonder whether that would be appropriate. So NHSIE visited us in March, as I reported, with regards to cleanliness and IPC. They didn't give us a RAG rating at the time because of, as quite rightly Anita's called out, our C. diff exceeding the target. What they wanted was to ensure that we did our post-infection reviews of the outstanding C. diff cases, which we did. We then had a tabletop exercise on Friday the 6th of May, and on Saturday the 7th I was given a verbal information from NHSEI that we've got a green status for cleanliness and IPC within the areas they visited, and therefore on the caveat that there were quarterly meetings with regards to the monitoring of C. diff cases going forward, which is important to continue because we do not want to breach that target. Again, bearing in mind to Anita's point that we didn't breach the others. So we have got some really good news. It's really good news for the ward staff. I don't think I've worked anywhere where we didn't visit an area during the inspection and the staff were very, very upset that we didn't visit for an actual cleanliness and IPC inspection, but the areas they visited and what they saw, the work around the divisional directors of nursing and the divisional directors has ensured a green status for infection control. So that's where the status is at the moment, Chair.
Thank you, Paula. Simon.
Thanks, David. Just a brief one from me on an update on where we are with discharges and how we're getting on with our partners, and also any innovations that we've introduced ourselves, things we can control that are improving discharges. I know that we are making some progress, but it would be helpful, I think, just to have it on the record now from where we are, particularly with partners helping us.
Thanks. Who wants to answer that? Paul, Matthew? Paul?
Yeah. There remain, to be honest, Simon, there still remain significant challenges. We're still seeing more admissions than discharges on a daily basis. For example, we did have a good day yesterday. We achieved 110 discharges. But we actually had 114 admissions, and the big issue, I mean, I know a gap of 4 doesn't seem much, but it becomes cumulative. We didn't have a good day on Monday, Tuesday was better, and as I said yesterday, 110 discharges actually slightly exceeds our daily target. But the biggest issue that we're facing at the moment is the timing, the profile of the admissions, also the profile of when clinical colleagues are saying a patient needs to be admitted, and the actual timing of discharges is significantly out of kilter. And at the moment, we're still coming in every morning with patients in our emergency department who have been clinically assessed, and that the need for admission has been identified, and that's carried over from the previous day. Clearly bringing into place the extended MAU in the radiotherapy unit and creating the pathway discharge unit is essential, and that's still delayed for reasons not appropriate to go into now. So we are making progress. Matthew and myself, along with Christine and Paula, met with Simon Trickett and Mary Gay earlier this week to emphasise the system commitment to the incident cell. And I think what we all concluded is that we need to free up some colleagues, both in the Health and Care Trust, our own trust, and CCG, so that we have a consistent and substantive input into that incident cell. Because I think when we are able to do that, we do see a clear benefit, and it's not just because it's International Nurses Day, but Paula led the cell last week, and our discharges before midday jumped from 17 to in excess of 30%. So when we do get the right people there, both the colleagues and the leadership, it demonstrates we can have an impact. The issue is how we make that sustainable. So it is progress. System colleagues are all working together. There's no distance or from any colleagues, but it's how we make this, how we provide the level of input we need to deliver it on a sustainable basis. Because as I said last week, there were 2 or 3 days where it nearly delivered and then fell down at the weekend and the beginning of this week.
Matthew, do you want to say something about the impact of all of this on ambulance handovers?
Yeah, I mean, I think where this is historically kind of exhibited the importance of good flow through the whole system of being previously in exit blocking the ED departments, and of course over the course particularly of the last few years that's increasingly emanated with ambulance delays in handing over their patients, and I think we're in a as the report shows in March, we had a very difficult month with high numbers of patients waiting a long time, whilst at the same time a lot of patients that really did need immediate emergency care were actually treated and prioritised by the clinical team. So clearly the situation is really worrying for those patients. It's problematic for the ambulance service, and we're working as closely as we can with them to make sure that firstly they understand what we're trying to do in addressing the issue, but secondly making sure that those patients that could be taken straight to ambulatory emergency care or straight to same-day emergency care and surgical assessment are taken there. But clearly this is something that as a leadership team really we spend so much time focusing on this that we are trying new things all the time, but we recognise there is a capacity gap in terms of those beds, and we also know that the department itself, hence why we're building it. But I think we've got to redouble our focus again, which we discussed with Simon and Mary from the CCG on Tuesday, about what else we can do to try and improve this. But recognise for the patients and the public, this is a worrying situation that we want to make sure that we can resolve as quickly as we can.
Thanks. Sue.
Sorry, you may not want me, because I was actually going to ask Paula something, but you've moved on from infection prevention and control, unless...
No, it's all right. No,
It was just a quick question, Paula. I was trying to work out, it's probably in the report and I'm just too dim to find it, but my impression is that patients are coming in with C. diff because of the massive increase in non-face-to-face GP antibiotics. And the other thing, would I be correct in saying, making the observation, that it's quite difficult to badge C. diff in for those other 4 bugs, because it's like comparing reptiles and mammals, and you need different strategies to cull mammals than you do reptiles, and they're very much the reptile spore formers, aren't they? And they are quite different. Would that be correct?
Yes, I would say so, absolutely, Sue. And thank you. Yes, you're right about the community cases, but obviously community onset and hospital acquired are grouped together, and the fact that we have had transmission within the hospital as well, but obviously we're working towards making sure that doesn't go any further. Thanks, Sue, for your question and your analogy.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a way of moving on from that, but thanks for that. Look, we've dealt with quite a few issues here, and I just want to kind of sum up, I think, where we probably are. Unless there are any other questions, issues around this that people want to talk about? No. Okay. So I think it's good to see that we're performing well in some areas. I think the staff sickness thing is a pretty enormous progress for us as an organisation. The financial position, I think, is better than we planned for, and we've done well in terms of restoration and recovery. Looking at the numbers there, I think they're all good things. And I would add the external inspection of our IPC arrangements as well. A good thing. So well done to everybody for all of that. But the issues remain. And on cancer, I'm not sure whether we're looking at it from the right position yet. And I think the appointment of a new director of cancer, I think, is a really helpful way. And perhaps we could organise a discussion in 2 or 3 months' time when the person is in place to have a really good root and branch look at all this. Because fundamentally the issue here is not 2-week waits and all those sorts of things. It's that we consistently diagnose people with cancer too late. That's why this country has such poor outcomes for cancer. And if we look at it from that lens, perhaps we might come up with some different and more radical conclusions about how we might deal with it. There is a view about whether direct access to a whole load of things might be a better way of getting that outcome than elsewhere. So it'd be good we got an opportunity to have a proper look at cancer, and I think we should get the new director, when they're in post, to come to us and talk to us about all of that. In terms of the urgent and emergency care issue, it's problematic at the moment. I understand that. In lots of ways, people are saying, I guess, that we've got an opportunity to take a step forward with the new beds coming on stream whenever that happens, and that will hear at a different time what's going to happen with all of that. But I think you always have to be careful when you do your performance improves when you have heroic leadership to do it. And I think Paul mentioned Paula Gardner as being that heroic leader last week who made this happen. That's great. Thank you, Paula, for all of that. But that's not a solution to this problem. It's not giving that sustainable issue. And so the work that's going to be done in terms of process improvement and all of that in this regard is going to be particularly, I think, critically important to get some change. So we need everyone to get behind that work to make it happen. But I do think we need to come with in a couple of months' time to the board with a sort of a real analysis of, never mind what's happening now, but what's going to happen in the winter. we've got to start planning that now, otherwise we'll lose it. So we need to take that forward as we go forward. All right. So thank you for all of that. Let's move on to the committee assurance reports. Oh, sorry, I forgot on my notes here. I forgot to mention, Vicky, you said you were going to say something about the high-level measures for the plan.
Sure. Thanks, David. I guess as the time of year when we take a step back and we look at the construction of the IPR, taking into account all of those that feedback that we've had over the year, and just recognising where we are as an organisation and some of the challenges that we face. So Matthew and the executive team, along with various subcommittee members, have been talking about how we could have 4 or 5 kind of real high-level optic measures that give us at a glance. So how are we doing? How does this feel? What's the temperature check? Are we on track? Are we not? And that's all around monitoring of the plan. So we've kind of settled on sort of monitoring the plan per se, improvement plan. So where are we against our improvement plan and our PEP trajectories, expenditure run rate, agency and locum spend, and those are kind of some of the kind of high level messages and key headline figures that we're talking about putting into one place in form of a balanced scorecard dashboard that will just be available as part of that IPR piece. In terms of the other aspects of the IPR, very much working through, as Paul's described, with some real clear trajectories on a month-on-month basis, so not back-ended trajectories towards Q3, Q4, but so we can see what the plan is on a monthly basis and what the actual has been, and including more visibility to our benchmarking position. So whilst we do have benchmarking data in our IPR at the moment, what it will do is show you currently what the benchmark data set is and where we currently figure in that in an actual number, as opposed to using that graph, sliding scale of graph, which we've used previously. So hopefully that will also allow us to have more visibility to that. And so just going through that design and kind of bringing it out and sharing it so that people feel comfortable with that. Rebecca and I spoke at length yesterday about how we will try and pilot some of this. I think Colin and Simon with the Finance and Performance Committee, we felt you were a really tough crowd, and we'd probably use you as our as our committee that we would test some of that with, if that's okay. And then obviously taking through then into the Quality Governance Committee as well. So David, I hope that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds fine to me. And good luck with your tough crowd.
Oh no.
Okay, let's move on then to the committee assurance reports. F&P, I think we've covered that.
Yes, Richard asked me to cover it. As you say, we've covered it all. The main item of discussion was around the plan, and we did have some concerns about its achievement, which Simon's highlighted. So I think all of that has been covered. And there is an item for board approval, but that's on the private board agenda, so nothing else to highlight.
Thanks, Colin. Any questions on that? No. Okay, QGC.
Yeah, hi. I think most of ours have been covered. Just to highlight, we had a very extensive discussion about the infection prevention and control, and we had our first interaction, which will become a standing item, with the new health and safety officer, and we will be keeping an eye on their action plan and ask for regular reports into QGC. But other than anything else, I think there's anything else to highlight, really.
Okay. Any other points on that? Thank you very much. Okay. Shall we then move on to Ockenden final report, April 2022? Justin?
Yeah.
Or Paul? I don't know. Is this a double act, or is it what? Going straight to Justin?
Yeah, I'll pick this up.
Okay.
Thank you. So good morning. Yeah, this is the Ockenden final report. So this report is for noting and to acknowledge the publication of the final Ockenden report. This is the second of 2 reports following the independent inquiry into the Shrewsbury and Telford Trust into maternity services. For those who have read the report, you'll note that it is a difficult report to read, and there's some very sad and tragic events detailed within the report. many avoidable, and lots of lessons in there for all maternity services to consider, and also potentially for all organisations to consider more widely, particularly around informed choice, freedom to speak up, involving families in ongoing investigations. The first report, that we reported into board last month with some good compliance rates, and we continue to make progress on those. The Directorate is at the moment pulling together the gap analysis against all of the essential actions that are in the final report, and that will be available in June. We have, because of some information that we were given from NHS England, focused very much on two particular recommendations, which were around continuity of care and newly qualified midwives, and that's on the private board agenda for later on today for discussion, although we have received further information as well to support us in how to address those actions. So as I say, this is just for noting at this point, and a fuller report will be available to board in June. And I'll pause there and take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions, comments? Simon, do you want to say anything as the maternity person?
No, I think it speaks for itself. It is a holding document for the moment. I know work is ongoing on those immediate and essential action items. Consultations have been had with staff around continuity of care, but it's moving forward, and I look forward to the fuller report coming in June.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Matthew?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and Simon, Justine, I know we discussed this at quite some length at the Hereford and Worcestershire Local Maternity and Neonatal System meeting yesterday, because obviously we want to make sure the LMNS is fulfilling its responsibilities around quality surveillance for safe births across the two counties, and as Simon says, we'll inevitably, I think, this will feature on the agenda of the LMNS from a system perspective quite significantly over the next few months, just to make sure that we're all lined up, if you like, with our system partners. So thanks to Justine and team for the continuing work. And I did get a really positive sense yesterday, actually worth just noting, that the relationships and working relationships between ourselves and Wye Valley Trust as our local provider with their new leadership, I think seem to be going really very well. So I want to just commend that as well.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? I mean, this is an awful report. I would encourage people to have a look at it if they haven't already. It does bring it home in a very graphic way, a whole set of issues that organisation was dealing with, and the way in which they treated the mothers, stroke parents, patients. All I would say about these kinds of reports is they do generate large numbers of recommendations, and 15 of these, 25 of these, 60 of the others, and if you're not careful in it, you implement them by ticking every box in that list. And I'm not suggesting in any way people will do that here, but that is yours, because fundamentally at the heart of it here, it's about making sure that when women give birth, they're in as safe an environment as we can possibly construct for them. It means that you need a fully staffed, motivated group of midwives doing all the things that they are trained to do, and have the opportunity to speak out when things are going wrong. And you need a service which delivers services in such a way that it embraces the views and attitudes and considerations of patients, and we listen to what they say and we do something about it. Fundamentally, that is at the heart of all of them, and we just need to hold on to that as we go through all the various 60 of these and 30 and I'm sure we will. That's at the heart of it, and we can't lose that as we go through that. The danger always in these circumstances is you can produce a document which ticks every single box, but actually your service is not doing what it needs to do. So just with that, thanks Justine, for I know an enormous amount of work that you're doing, and I think it's a very, very difficult environment to work in maternity at the moment, both for the midwives themselves, given the amount of criticism that they're getting, amount of publicity. For people who are trying to lead those services, very difficult at the moment, given the not necessarily unanimity in the service about what needs to be done. So thanks very much for keeping the thing going, and we're absolutely supporting you in doing that. So thank you very much. So we note the report. Thank you. Let's then move on to the Chief Finance Officer's report.
Thank you very much, David. The positive thing, oops, sorry, somehow I've just shut down my laptop. Hit the wrong button, David, so I'll do it from...
It does happen.
It's one of those with password protected, just jumped in, apologies. So I think, as we've already mentioned in the IPR, a positive outcome in terms of the month 12 position, where we came in below what we suggested, so that's good at £1.4 million versus the 1.9. Additionally, you will note that we stayed within our capital limit, and as you're aware, we have a quite significant capital programme both last year and running into this year, and spent just around about £53 million, which is one of the biggest capital programmes we've done, and a lot of that is still work in progress on items such as the urgent emergency care centre that we've been working on, as well as some other significant pieces of work such as the community diagnostic hub or centre at Kidderminster Treatment Centre. So again, very positive, and you can see we had a good cash balance as well, which is very much driven by the fact that over the COVID era of funding that we'd been paid in advance, but also were drawn down for our capital funds. And other than that, David, I don't think there's a great deal to say apart from, it really focused now is on this year, and again managing the capital for this year in particular, as well as delivering the challenging plan that we know we've set for ourselves as part of the system.
Now, the only thing I take from this, Robert, is we delivered a better financial outcome than we said we were going to do, and I expect the same next year. Absolutely. Okay, let's ask any questions, comments people have got on all of this. Oh, come on! You all want to get your sixpenny thing when it goes wrong. Yeah. No comments. Okay. Well, thanks for that, Robert. Thanks for you and your team for the work that you've done over the last 12 months. It's always good to do what you said you were going to do. Thank you for that. Let's move on then, and we note that for assurance. Let's move on then to the safe staffing report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll take the nurse staffing and Justine will do midwifery. This paper comes with a level of assurance of 5. What we have continued to see is high acuity during March and April, and really that hasn't dropped off into May either. One good news story is we have reduced the vacancy factor for healthcare assistants from 15.11 to 9.74. The main issue there is that we retain those, and therefore that we're making sure those programmes are working with regards to good induction and working with Health Education England to make sure we continue to keep those vacancy numbers as low as we possibly can. So in actual figures, I've got a 97 per person, as in actual people, vacancy rate for registered nurses, 26 for registered midwives, and 89 for healthcare assistants. There has been 15 minor harms, of which nothing has come to any significant harm to the patient with regards to gaps, and we'll continue to fill the gaps with bank and agency. I'll pause there for any questions.
Thanks. Any questions? So how many? Oh, sorry. Okay, Colin.
Thanks, Jack. I was interested in the comments on the provision of safe care and treatment, the support to our people, and wondered what the feedback like from the staff generally, and in particular any of those who've received that sort of support. Is it the right thing, right time, right place?
Yes, I think it is actually, Colin. It's difficult to pinpoint one particular issue, but yes, I think it is the right time, the right place, and therefore that is seamless then.
Thanks, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Paula, for the report. And I think two comments that I've made. Firstly, on the back of Colin's question, certainly I think there's good support in place in the way that Paul was described in the report from a nursing perspective. But inevitably, it's important that we recognise that right across our staff group, actually, the big things that people are concerned with, often on a weekly and day-to-day basis, are things like would be in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the hygiene factors, getting paid accurately, being able to park. Those are the kind of things that I tend to hear more often from our staff than the kind of lack of kind of support in this area. And it is something as an executive team we are reflecting on. How do we approach getting those things right for our staff, which tend to be more meaningful actions that we need to take. So that's the first reference that I wanted to make. I think the second one is just taking us back to our board-to-board meeting with the Health and Care Trust colleagues. Was really understanding that some of the real challenges they have in relation to nursing vacancies, both in community and mental health, and reassuring that obviously we're helping them out from our international nurses programme. But I just wonder, Paula, whether there's an opportunity here as good system partners to help the Health and Care Trust with some of the things that we're doing successfully on recruitment and retention of nurses and nurses allied to medicine to help, because unless we have a fully established Health and Care Trust and community teams, our mental health teams, we'll end up with the consequences of that coming into the hospital. So I just wonder whether there's any more that we can do to help colleagues with quite significant vacancy rates.
Yes, thank you, Matthew. And yes, working with Natalie, well, it's the new Director of Nursing for the Health and Care Trust, and she came and did a walk through with me on Friday here to see the constraints sometimes about urgent emergency care. We talked a number of issues around staffing, and I also discussed this at the overview and scrutiny meeting on Monday about how we may end up rotating people in to offer them a different way of working. So, whether we have a healthcare support worker that the programme works, that they work 6 months in acute, 6 months in community and 6 months in mental health, and then they decide where they may want to work. And the same with registered nurse. Do we do a rotational programme? And in keeping with that as well, do we include Y Valley so that we truly work as a system? So looking at, that's not something that's going to be easy to do, but this is in my head about, and even to work with the council with regards to Pathway 1 and Pathway 2, more Pathway 1, about how the caring facility within taking patients through to their home, and does that healthcare support worker support that person from acute community into their own home. Again, ideas in my head put forward, but with the new ICS chief nurse, Kath Cobain, will be working through that as a system. Thank you.
Thanks. Anita.
So just as an aside, Paula, that idea of rotations was actually one of the things that came out of our table on the board-to-board that we did with Health and Care Trust last week, and the idea of doing rotations between the two trusts actually for RNs and potentially HCAs as well was something that we were certainly talking about. My question really with this, I was struck by how high the retention rate was for the international nurses, and that we were benchmarking very well on that one. Do we have clear visibility of what our retention rate 12 months after recruitment is for nurses, for midwives, and also for AHPs, and how that benchmarks? And are we learning anything from that, and from talking to staff? And I agree that car parking is the thing I hear about more than anything else, so I agree with Matthew on that. But are there things we can learn? Are there things that we can do if we aren't benchmarking terribly well? But I don't actually know how. So
we are benchmarking very well, and we're 92% retention rate for nurses across the piece. So not just international nurses, but 92%. So absolutely doing really well on retention. For me, it's not the registered nurse workforce or allied health, it's the healthcare assistants. the vacancy rate, and that is not just our trust, that is regionally and nationally, and we need to work to ensure that we retain them, because as I said to the overview and scrutiny meeting on Monday, it's a hard job, not just being a nurse but being a support worker. It's really hard out there, and the acuity and the dependency of our patients, coupled with they can be very sick within a high dependency, but very sick as well, very elderly, very frail. Coupled with that, then that's difficult then to make sure that you care for those patients, but also that we discharge them timely as well to their appropriate care setting, and that's it's trying to make nursing NHS work sexy again, and think people, because the support workers can absolutely go and work in the supermarket for a lot more money than we pay them as a support worker. So we've got to think of different ways. It's the support worker element that I'm more concerned about at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the next year or so is going to depend on our ability to deal with and support workers across both health and social care. They're relatively poorly paid people anyway. They must be having an incredible struggle at the moment with the financial strictures on energy and all that, and all the rest of it. And if you add to that the community workers, the care workers, all of that, that's really going to be an important. So I think a major plank of the way in which we're going to look at winter is to look at that workforce as a whole and think how we can support it and look after it as we go forward. But that's a conversation for another day. And thanks for the report, Paula. We note the report. Let's then move on and talk about midwifery. Justine.
Yeah, thank you. So this is the staffing report for March. We're offering an assurance level of 4, which is a maintained level from previous months. Our activity in March was kind to us. It was a quieter month. We did actually meet our acuity in 55% of the time before any mitigation actions were taken, and that is an increase on previous months. And we're seeing the acuity tools being completed much better now, which is really helping us understand what's happening in each of the areas. Our sickness remains high. You'll see there at 9.84%, and behind COVID infections, unfortunately stress and anxiety is the highest reported reason for absence within our service at the moment, and that I think that reflects the wider organisational status as well. COVID was a little bit better for us in terms of staff absence, with about ranging from 4 to 8%, and that has been an improving picture into April, which is really good news. Turnover, you'll see, was sitting around 16%, which is still a concern for us. Our vacancy rate was sitting at 9%, with the majority of those vacancies being in our inpatient area. We have very few vacancies now in our community and continuity teams, which is the good news part of the story. We can see there that there was one of the red flags to be concerned about when there was at one occasion where a woman wasn't receiving one-to-one care in labour for a short period of time, but we did maintain the supernumerary status as a shift leader within a month, which is another red flag that we're always very keen to keep an eye on. So I think in summary we can say that minimum safe staffing levels were not met on all shifts. However, mitigations were put in place via our escalation policy, and we requested support from our continuity and community colleagues to make sure that the environment was safe for women, based on our professional judgment and the activity in the clinical area at the time. And I'll pause there and take any questions.
Thanks, Justine. I mean, the turnover rate is quite high, isn't it? I don't know whether has that been a consistently high?
No, we had quite a number of leavers for in one of the quarters. So obviously the rolling rate then continues to demonstrate high turnover, but it was quite concentrated, particularly in one of our community teams. We had a number of people who retired. and we also at the same time had recruited some community midwives from one of our neighbouring trusts, who were looking for a change, but once they joined our service, I think they realised community services were very similar in all parts of the region, and fortunately for their previous employees went back to their previous service, and so we lost a number of people around the same time as well.
Thanks. So the grass isn't always greener. Colin.
Indeed.
Colin.
Just a point of detail, Justine. I was going to ask a question about the supernumerary status of the shift leader, because it says in the report it was not maintained in March. Unless I misheard you, I think you said it was. So, is there a typo in the report?
Yeah, I think it's my reporting. There were no increases from the previous month, so that is a significant red flag for us if it does happen. And we make sure that we mitigate that as much as possible, because we want our shift leaders obviously to have that helicopter view at all times of the labour ward, because that is what maintains safety.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thanks very much for that. We note that report. Thank you for assurance. Let's move on to review of provider licence conditions FT4 and G6. Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. The paper is to seek board approval of publication of our self-certification. The backing documentation is attached. In summary, the Trust is declaring a non-compliant position against the two conditions. It's detailed at length in the paper, and it's been through a number of committees, Trust Management, Executive, Quality Governance, and also Audit and Assurance, so has had the oversight of our internal and external auditors. The position is as was last year, and it's primarily as a result of two factors: one in respect of the underlying financial position of the trust, and secondly in relation to the fact that the trust was subject to Section 31 conditions, which have now been removed, but that was the position for part of the year, and the trust remains subject to legal undertakings, primarily in respect of those now removed Section 31 conditions. However, we're expecting the legal undertakings to be reviewed this year and revised. I don't desperately want to go into more detail unless people have got specific questions, but to provide assurance that the self-assessment has been thoroughly reviewed through the committee process.
Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay, thank you. And we approve the report and for it to be published. Okay, terms of reference, finance and performance and quality governance. Rebecca.
Yes, again, these have been through the various committees. We've taken the opportunity to take account of recent guidance in respect of reviewing the approach to non-executive director champion roles. So we've gone from a very significant plethora of different roles. These have been consolidated into 6, and then the remaining responsibilities have been embedded throughout the committee structure. This is us catching up as part of our annual review, and we're taking account of that guidance at this point. The minor updates have been incorporated and are highlighted within the terms of reference, and these have all been approved by the committees, so they're here for the board to approve as it's as the parent body.
Thank you. Anita.
Just one comment. I mean, I've no problem with the changes that are here. I guess the thing that is missing for me, and should I say, and I'm particularly keen to see the reference to estate strategy and the net zero plan. However, what is missing for me is any oversight of our responsibility, which is clearly defined now, for tackling health inequalities in the population. I know we're not, I know we're probably at the beginning of that journey, but I do think we need to consider how we're going to put governance around that, because it would be so easy, given everything else we've got on our plate, for us to be continually looking at the short term and not looking at the wider, bigger things that we will be held to account for in due course, I'm sure. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Anita. So I think in terms of specific responsibilities, as a primarily strategic issue, it generally would sit with the board unless the board chooses to delegate that elsewhere within the committee structure. It's something that we can discuss as we pick up as part of it. It's clearly one of the priorities that will come forward, and perhaps as we look at what those priorities are potentially next month, we can discuss where that sits within our structure, and we can adjust the terms of reference accordingly if board chooses to delegate that responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, it does require a bit of thought, actually, because it spans almost all the committees in the way that they function. Matthew?
Yeah, I guess that was the point I was going to make, and I was very struck at the National Leaders event a couple of weeks ago by the lead at the NHS England's team, really about both the medium to longer term strategic importance of considering health inequalities in our local population. But she also referenced the kind of more immediate patient safety and business priority, that really us understanding better about the way people from our local population, perhaps who are less equal, if I can call it like that, than others, how they use health services differently and sometimes more. And so one of the things that we've very much been discussing internally, as well as with starting to discuss with place level colleagues, is do we really understand who the people that are high users of healthcare services are, and whether they are matching to those that we would consider having high health inequality status, and whether we need to be much more targeted and much more focused with populations that currently have challenges in the way in which we organise ourselves. So I think, Anita, you're right, we do need to consider the medium to longer term, how we oversee that, but I think we also need to make sure our annual plan priorities and our 3-year plan really talks to some of the business and patient safety priorities that this brings us. And so that's a conversation I think at executive level and at place level will be continuing, and we'll come back with some reflections of that on that in terms of governance in due course.
Can I just suggest as a particular point, I mean, cancer diagnosis is a really notoriously fickle issue in relation to who's diagnosed quicker than who sits there with a stage 4 cancer, all of those sorts of things, I think. So when we bring the cancer, can we also see it through the lens of health inequalities to see how that is actually, I think that would give us a practical example of what it means. Okay, very good. Thank you for that, Anita. With the caveat that we need, somebody else wants to say anything? No? Okay, with the caveat that we need to reflect further on how we apply the lens of health inequalities to the business of the board and the subcommittees, can I ask people to approve the amendments that we have to the terms of reference of finance and performance and quality governance? I can, yes. Thank you very much. So there's no other business, so thank you very much for that. That's the end of the meeting in public. We will reconvene as a board in private at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. See you later.